Throughout life, you've been through a conditioning process that's created a mindset overflowing with, I am nots. As a school child with a less than satisfactory grade on your report card, you thought to yourself, I am not smart. You place anywhere other than number 1 and say, I am not talented. You feel criticized and believe that I am not good. You look in the mirror and compare yourself to a glamorous movie idol or homecoming queen and tell yourself, I am not attractive. Your relationship fractures and you think, I am unloved or I am unworthy. These and many more like them are repeated throughout your developmental years and into adulthood and become your core defining self-concept. You are listening to this book because you wish to elevate your life to heights way beyond ordinary. You are endeavoring to adopt new truths that are harmonious with your higher and highest self. Now is the perfect time for you to begin discovering the God within you and yourself as God, and to expand your self-concept. I applaud you. Your self-concept is everything that you believe to be true about yourself. Overcoming this I am not mentality begins with trusting your inner world of spirit. There are no boundaries restricting your inner world, but your worldview and your self-concept in the outer world are defined by your 5 senses. The outer world is always changing, which by our previous definition means it is not real. This awareness could lead to you experiencing a majestic wake-up call right here, right now. How does it feel to realize that most of what you believe about yourself and your limitations is based on an illusion? A well-intentioned illusion handed to you by people in bodies that no longer exist in a time that has passed. Much of your self-concept is a fiction based on beliefs that are untrue and contain no veracity when you were first exposed to them. This is exquisitely detailed by Anita Moorjani, who had a near-death experience, an NDE, that challenged all of her previous self-concepts about who and what she was. Her story illustrates that there's another dimension where you can become one with God and create miracles in your everyday life. While in her NDE state, Anita was shown that everything going on in our lives is dependent on this energy around us, created by us. Nothing is solid. We are the creators of our surroundings and life conditions depending on how we use this energy. Our physical bodies become sick because of the energetic level at which we live. As Anita reported, I realized that if I went back, it would be with a very healthy energy. Then the physical body would catch up to the energetic conditions very quickly and permanently. I was given the understanding that this applies to anything, not just diseases. Anita was given the opportunity to return to her cancer-ravaged body. Astoundingly, 4 days after her NDE, her body showed almost no signs of cancer. Anita realized that the seemingly solid world that our senses offer us is really an illusion. She changed the outcome of test results and concluded that we can change anything by changing our energy that we create with our thoughts. For her, this included a reality called cancer because a shift in consciousness actually made it disappear. Quote, she says, from what I saw, it looked like we are energy first and physical is only a result of expressing our energy, she says. And then she says further, and we can change our physical reality if we change our energy, unquote. This is what your declaration of I am God can be for you. God is not physical. It is energy. And this divine energy is not like the material world energy that your senses report to you. Anita reported that she experienced a profound awareness that everything and everyone are interconnected. There is no separation. All she had to do to heal her physical body was to merge into God consciousness and be perfect love. Quoting her, she says, I felt one with everything. I felt a connection with every living thing, and it felt like the whole universe is within me, unquote. She reports that time and space felt very different in that dimension. She's quoted as saying, it doesn't feel linear like it really does here. It felt like everything was happening simultaneously, unquote. Anita came to find that even past lives are not past. The words that best describe them are parallel lives because there is no time and no separation. That idea is something that our senses find next to impossible to comprehend because we think linear. Cause and effect, before and after. For Anita, there was only love, and it was an all-consuming love that she described as constructing the entire world. She says, I was also flooded in an all-encompassing, unconditional, loving energy. This universal energy is there for us no matter who or what we are. I felt amazingly powerful and magnificent. The world that Anita experienced while in her NDE is also your world. It requires making a shift to the true understanding of what the words I am signify to you. Live from the perspective that all things are possible, planted firmly in the depths of your imagination. The more you believe in your own divine nature, the more it starts to become real for you. Anita's almost instantaneous healing from an imminent death prognosis taught her that our highest self is unconditional love, no separation, no time, no judgment. As she puts it, quote, whatever you believe, you will find that you are correct, unquote. Just think of the importance of living from this perspective now, rather than hoping it will become your reality sometime in the future or after your body dies. Living from the I am God awareness necessitates knowing that you are one with transcendent unconditional love. So let's first examine this question of who you are. Who am I? Consider how many bodies you've occupied since birth. Who is the I that continues to leave one body behind and then enter another? You know for certain that you, the person that you call I, the one attempting to figure out who you are, started out in a little baby body weighing somewhere between 5 and 10 pounds. The I that is you fully entered and occupied that little baby body. Gradually, you began to discard that baby body and move into a small toddler body that crawled, then it walked, and then it ran, and took on an entirely new appearance. Your 2-year-old self would find it difficult to recognize the baby body that you'd now completely abandoned. You lived in this toddler body for a while and then discarded it, too, including every cell that was in your body at birth. The subsequent body you entered was a prepubescent body that bore a similarity to your toddler body, but was completely different. The I in the question still hasn't been discovered, but it's become absolutely clear that you are obviously not your body. Why? Because the I has remained, though it continuously sheds the body that it occupies. This strange phenomenon of you being an I that continuously enters, discards, and re-enters a new body has proceeded right up until this very moment. I am currently in a 71-year-old body that's nothing like the body I occupied 50 years ago. I remember well what that 20-year-old body I occupied looked like and what it could do and what it knew and what it didn't know, but I can't find it anywhere. It's simply an illusion. It's gone from this physical world, as is every body that both you and I have occupied in our entire lifetime. The I that I use to describe myself is not so obsessed that he insists upon staying only in one body. In fact, the I that is me finally recognizes the ancient spiritual truth spoken by divine masters since antiquity. None of us are really doing anything. Rather, we, that is our bodies, are merely being done. What is your body being done by? An invisible organizing intelligence that takes the cells of your body, changes them into new cells, and discards the old cells. The I that you think you are observes the entire process, for the most part helplessly. The physical body that you think of as you is rearranged in a pattern designed by a formless intelligence independent of your opinion. This I that you use to describe yourself isn't the physical form that you occupy and take with you everywhere. Quantum physics states that the body you're occupying, which is listening to these words right now, is completely different from the body you were in when you listened to the previous paragraph. Such is the nature of the physical world in which we all live. The ancient philosopher Heraclitus put it this way several thousand years ago, and it's true today. Quote, all things are in motion and nothing is at rest. You cannot go into the same river twice, unquote. A river is a constantly changing phenomenon, as is a tree, a mountain, a goat, a human, and the entire physical universe, including Earth. That which defines a thing, therefore, is not physical in nature, it's metaphysical. When asked what is real, an ancient spiritual avatar responded without hesitation, that is real, which never changes. And since your body is in a continuous state of change, it really isn't real, according to this definition. If you try to find that toddler body you once occupied, you realize that it's not real, since it no longer exists. Even while you were in it years ago, you couldn't call it real, because the moment you pinpointed and defined it as real, it would be something else, something new. What you're calling real would already have disappeared. Still, you know with all of this change taking place that there is a changeless component to who you are. The I in that toddler body hasn't changed. It's in the body that you currently occupy. The I is your higher self, changeless and real. This higher self is who you are. When you make this discovery and consciously befriend the I that you are, nothing is impossible. Keep in mind that if it is changing, it's not real. The I in the question, who am I, isn't anything that involves the physical you, since that continuously changes and disappears. Therefore, to answer the question, who am I, with any reference to your body and its various talents, accomplishments, accumulations, or physical prowess, is to define yourself as unreal. Who you are, then, must be changeless, and therefore birthless, as well as deathless. Who you are is a formless energy, a spirit, if you will, with the capacity to be unchanged and at the same time occupy an infinity of bodies. Think about this. It is truly a bewildering phenomenon. You are changeless and therefore real. What you've believed were facts explaining who you are simply illusions, or what metaphysicians call unreal. You're not an American, an Italian, or an African. You're not a male or a female, a Democrat or a Republican. You're one with the true oneness, God. You are not athletic or magical, mathematical or literary or any other label. Transcending labels, particularly those that have been placed on you by others in your past, opens you to the opportunity of soaring in the now in any way that you desire. You can be all things at any present moment in your life. When this divine intelligence is limitless and without boundaries and is who we are, is just one of those absurd notions that tells us that it is our lower identities that who we are, rather than that which is noticing and watching it and living in it and is ageless and timeless and formless. Your family relationships are in your mind. When you close your eyes, your family disappears. Where do they go? Nowhere, but doing this exercise helps you to recognize that your relatives exist as thoughts in your mind. If the focus of your inner dialogue about your family members is on what they're doing that's wrong, then that's precisely how your relationship with them will be experienced. If your inner speech centers on what's annoying about them, then that's what you'll notice. As much as you're inclined to blame them for your annoyance, it's yours, and it's coming from your thoughts. If you make a decision to put your inner attention, your life energy, on something quite different, your relationship will change. In your thoughts, where your family relationships exist, you'll no longer be annoyed, angry, hurt, or depressed. If in your mind you're thinking, my intention is to be authentic and peaceful with this relative, then that's what you'll experience, even if that relative continues to be exactly the way he or she has always been. Changing your mind is really changing your relationships. Being authentic and peaceful with your relatives is only a thought away. You can learn to change your thoughts by intending to create authentic and peaceful feelings within yourself. No one is capable of making you upset without your consent, and you've given your consent too frequently in the past. When you begin practicing the intention to be authentic and peaceful, you withdraw your consent to be in the lower energy. You connect to peace itself and decide to bring peace to your relatives, thereby immediately gaining the power to change the energy of family gatherings. Prior to my waking up to the power of intention, family visits were events that caused me consternation because of the attitudes and behavior of some of my wife's relatives. I'd prepare for a Sunday afternoon family visit by getting anxious and upset over what I anticipated to be a fretful, lousy experience, and I seldom disappointed myself. I'd focus my thoughts on what I didn't like, and I defined my relationship with my in-laws in this manner. Gradually, as I began to understand the power of intention and left my ego behind, I substituted kindness, receptivity, love, and even beauty for my former annoyed and angry assessments. Before family get-togethers, I'd remind myself that I'm what I choose to be in any and all circumstances, and I chose to be authentically peaceful and have a good time. In response to something that used to annoy me, I'd now say to my mother-in-law in a loving way, "I never thought of it that way. Tell me more." In response to what I previously considered to be an ignorant comment, I'd respond, "That's an interesting point of view. When did you first learn about this? In other words, I was bringing my own intention to be in a state of peace to this encounter and was refusing to judge them. The most amazing things began to happen. I started looking forward to having these family members at our home. I began to see them as much more enlightened than I'd previously thought. I actually enjoyed our times together, and every time something came up that I'd found annoying in the past, I'd overlook it and respond with love and kindness instead. At an earlier stage of my life, expressions of racial or religious prejudice were a stimulus for my anger and resentment. Now I'd quietly respond with a kind and gentle reminder of my own opinions and simply let the matter drop. Over the years, I found that not only did the racial and religious slurs diminish to zero, but I noticed that my in-laws were expressing tolerance and even love toward minorities, as well as those who practiced religions different from their own. Although my primary intention was to stay in a state of peace, I discovered that by not joining in the low energies of my in-laws, not only was the entire family more peaceful, but many enjoyable and even enlightening conversations developed. I had as much to learn from my in-laws as I had to teach. Even when I disagreed vehemently with a judgment directed at me, if I remembered my intention to have a peaceful relationship with them, I was able to do just that. No longer did I think about what I disliked, or what was missing, or what always had been. I stayed focused on making these gatherings fun, loving, and most important to me, peaceful. And what you have to learn to do is develop an inner candle flame that never flickers, though the worst goes before you. You must know that all of the problems, all the difficulties, all the victimization that you may feel in your life, all of the strings that are being pulled by somebody else, are really things that you have allowed up until now. And now you make a recommitment to your own excellence, or your own non-victim status, if you will. Some of the categories of where people dichotomize and judge are good and bad. They try to put the whole world into what is good and what is bad based upon some perception I have. And those things that don't fit into it the way I think they ought to be are bad, and all the things that I agree with are good. And so you find yourself going through your whole life running into half of the people or more who are doing things in a different way than you do and judging them all to be bad, and therefore being their victim because they now own your emotional strings. Remember, being a victim isn't necessarily a physical thing. In fact, that's very seldom the thing, because we have laws to protect each other from being physically abused by each other. It isn't as if somebody's putting you into a jail, into a cell. It is the victimization is what you experience in your mind and in your emotions. And this comes from judging, from categorizing, from compartmentalizing people and putting them into the compartments. And then when they don't fit with the behavior that you think they should exhibit, you find yourself upset and worked up and angry and hurt. It's really important to develop a quiet mind when it comes to all of this. A quiet mind is a mind that is at peace, a mind that doesn't judge. Just because you label somebody else to be something obnoxious or nasty or hurtful doesn't mean that that's what they are. That's just your judgment, and that's your definition of yourself as someone who needs to judge. So learning not to judge and unclogging your mind, if you will, of judgments and negativity and quieting your mind. I read an interesting article this summer on the astronauts and their spiritual experiences of having gone into the universe outside of the Earth plane and looking back. And one of the astronauts was quoted as saying that when he looked back at the Earth, this blue planet, like what our sky is what you see from out there, and you look then in one direction, you see Earth and this tiny little dot, this blue dot, and then you look out the other way and you see an infinite number of worlds, and you look all around you and you're surrounded by this infinity of this universe. He said, I realized that there's an intelligence to this system, that it is an intelligent system that is all absolutely, and he's like, it happened for him in a moment, this instantaneous kind of realization that there's an intelligence to all of this, that the intelligence that is a part of the universe, or that allows the universe to work. Again, the label isn't important. He said it made him realize that it's all working absolutely perfectly, and that it's all on purpose, and that all of it has a purpose. Well, I have discovered that most people really don't believe they have a purpose, or they spend a big hunk of their life trying to discover their purpose, or they will find so many events
transpiring in their life that seem to be inconsistent with any kind of grander purpose, that it's impossible for them to accept that this is anything but just one grand accident. I know it's not an accident. And once you discover your purpose, and the way that you discover that, that's that secret source. So that's the secret force, if you will, that is within you at all times. This invisible, silent, empty space that is a part of every one of us. That is what allows us to be. My own development is probably just as appropriate to talk about here as anything on these tapes, because I often think to myself that if I can do it, coming from where I came from, that anybody can. I come from impoverished beginnings, a child who never had an allowance in his life, didn't even know what it was. When other kids would talk about my allowance, I didn't know anything about that, because there just wasn't anybody there to give me an allowance. The people that were there didn't have it to give away anyway. So it was very, very early in my own development that I learned the secrets of being my own person and my own strengths. That internal kind of knowingness isn't something I believe that I learned somewhere along the line through some magical, instantaneous kind of revelation. It was something that I believe I showed up with here, and that I think that every single person has that capacity for, but they don't seem to choose it. And it's like knowing that you have that inner strength, and knowing that nobody else can make you unhappy, and knowing that no circumstance out there is too big for you to handle, and knowing that when you go off to sleep at night, no matter what has happened all day long, that you still only have yourself to live with, and that very private inner world wherein you talk to yourself, and we call this self-talk or whatever you want to call it. All of us do this all the time. We have these conversations with ourselves, which is really two people. We are having a conversation with ourselves, and we do this all the time. And what the quality of those conversations are, how you process the daily events of your life and all of the things that are happening to you, is really the secret source of enormous strength. And then, as you get a little older, you begin to put a label on that. You begin to identify that in some way as something that is more than just an intuitive way of processing the world in a positive direction. It's more than that. You begin to realize that you're not alone. And a lot of people believe that they are alone in the world, and that this inner world of thought, this inner world of power and of inner conviction, or whatever you want to call it, is something that you can rely on, but it's not just something that you're alone with. And as I got older and more experienced in it, I began to see that I believe I have someone with me, or guides with me, or some kind of help available to me at all times. And it's just really a question of whether you decide to believe it or don't believe it. It isn't anything we can put to a double-blind study and have scientists come up and say, no, this doesn't exist or that doesn't exist. It's just a knowing. And when you have that guide, and almost all of the great spiritual masters and the great religions and so on, when you begin to study them, as I have done in more recent years in my life, and written books about them and produced tapes about them, you begin to discover that the greatest thinkers, the great contributors, all have this sort of inner knowing that they're not alone, that help is available to you. Help in the form of whatever you want to call it isn't even relevant. If you want to call it God, or you want to call it Buddha, or you want to call it Christ, or you want to call it spirituality or consciousness or whatever, it isn't the label that's important. It's the experience of it, and it's the knowing that it's there, and knowing that you can go there at any time.
You have to really get your past clear. You have to get out of it. You have to get out of the wake. You know, the wake is the trail that is left behind, right? The wake doesn't drive the boat. It's just a trail that's left behind. It's an illusion to believe that the things that happened to you in your past are the reason why your life isn't working today. You can go to therapy for the rest of your life and analyze it and figure it all out, but it still all happened. And in a universe in which there's an intelligent system guiding every single aspect of it, every mosquito, every snail, all of the passageways inside of your body, and all of the glorious ways that the planets all align with each other. There's one force in the universe that's flowing through everything, that there's no mistakes in it. And I think for me, two things really happened that I really strongly urge you, before you go any further, before we go any further here, is to really examine the wake of your life and to understand that it's just a trail that is left behind, and to let it go and merge yourself into the present moment, which is where God is. God isn't going to be doing anything different an hour from now than God is doing now. And God isn't doing anything different right now than God was doing an hour ago. So that God is all there is now. Just now. And any time you are not here now, you are away from God. And any time you are away from being at peace, you have sent God out of your life. So connecting on a spiritual level, on an energy level, which I'll go into great depth later, is really removing yourself from your past. I've written about this in a book a few years ago called You'll See It When You Believe It. But for me, the real turning point in my life came when I was able to finally, once and for all, practice this thing called forgiveness. There's a Chinese proverb that says if you're going to pursue revenge, you'd better dig 2 graves. And of course, Mark Twain's famous line about forgiveness. Forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. On the heel that has crushed it. And I tell you this, and I say this to you because, not to elicit any sympathy, because in my way of looking at the world, and all of the writing that I have been doing this past quarter of a century, and particularly in the last year with the spiritual solution to every problem, I have come to a very serious awareness that everything in the wake had to happen, and the evidence for it is that it did. That's the evidence. That's all the evidence you really need. And if you'll just stop for a moment, and this is a little weird, and I'll point it out, but in a universe which is endless, in which there is no such thing as time, in which there are no beginnings and no ends, and in which we are all infinite souls, there is an infinite number of times that we can be here, incarnated in any number of ways, endlessly. I mean, when you think of no beginnings and no ends, that used to be one of the hardest things for me to do when I was a child. And it still is when I really contemplate it. The idea of being dead for 1,000,000 years is not a problem. Is it for you? 1,000,000 years? You say, all right, I can wait it out. I'll just be dead anyway. But forever? Like another 1,000,000 and another 1,000,000 and then 4 billion more, and you haven't even gotten started yet on how long you're going to be dead. The endlessness of it all, the infinity of it all, the no beginnings and no ends, the no boundaries of it all, is almost too startling to comprehend when we are coming from our egos, which have beginnings and ends. So that who's to say, do you know who the most influential person in my life was? The person who has allowed me to come here and to speak about these things on these tapes and on this program? The person who has allowed me to write and express and experience the kinds of things that I've experienced and to grow in a spiritual dimension. You know who the most influential person in my life was? My father. This man who walked out when I was born. This man who had absolutely nothing to do with me, and the only reason I went to his grave was to find out if my name was on the death certificate. That's all I wanted to know. Did he even acknowledge in death that he had a son named Wayne? And he did. But who's to know that God and Melvin Lyle Dyer, before he incarnated in 1915, had a conversation. And God said to him, what do you want to do in this trip around? And he said, I'd like to teach one person forgiveness. So I'll go there and I'll just be an asshole. And that's what I'm signing up for. And there'll come a time when my youngest son will have to forgive me. And in the process of doing that, he will teach millions of others. Who knows? Who's to say? Your consciousness expands in every direction. It means there's no up and there's no down. It means there's no right and there's no wrong. It means that there's no north and there's no south. It means that there's no beginning and no end. You begin to move into a consciousness place within yourself that you'll find yourself, when you move into spirit, you're going to find yourself doing things that you don't understand why you're doing them. In 1994, when Immaculée was imprisoned in this tiny little bathroom with 7 other people with no facilities, she did something that I found so astounding. What she did when she entered that bathroom is she asked the pastor whose home she was in, "Do you have an English and a French dictionary?" And she learned English while she was being hunted to be killed. For what reason? Why would someone who is in that kind of a state practice, day in and day out, up to 8-10 hours, and she couldn't speak. They didn't speak for 91 days. No sound whatsoever. So 5 years later, she is a survivor. She represents less than 0.5% of the Tutsi women of Rwanda who survived. All the rest were killed. She went into a place within herself and taught herself a language that she was going to need 5 years from now. That's what I mean by your consciousness expands in every direction. And then 5 years later, in 1999 or 2000, she had when she was here in America on an asylum visa, married, living out on Long Island, has 2 children, is assimilated into our culture, is a great spokesperson for transcending hatred on the planet. She woke every day, 3 o'clock in the morning, before she went to work at the UN, and wrote every little detail of what happened in those 91 days. 150,000 words she wrote and gave that to me 5 years after that. But how did she know in 1994 that she was going to be in America and coming up on a stage like this and talking to our country in a language that is her 3rd language? How did she know that? Your consciousness expands in every direction. When you have an inkling, when you have, like Ryan, when you have a feeling within you that this is something that you have to do, that you can't be stopped from doing it, the whole world changes. And you start and you listen to it. And you find yourself, if someone hands you a book, and then someone else talks about that book, and then someone else mentions it, and then you see the author on television, and all of a sudden you start saying, wait a minute, I've got to listen to this. I am being directed. I'm being called. I trust in this. I totally, completely trust. Your consciousness expands in every direction when you enter the world of spirit, and you get yourself pulled in these directions, and you allow yourself to be pulled in that way. That's what I mean by your consciousness expands in every direction. Nothing is impossible. And whatever you find yourself doing, that's what you allow yourself to do and what you allow yourself to be. There's a great quote by Rumi. He's just one of the greatest. Every tree and plant in the meadow seemed to be dancing. Those which average eyes would see as fixed and still. That's what happens when your consciousness expands in every direction. You see, you understand the Tao. The Tao is like it's the silence between the notes that makes the music. It's the space between the bars that holds the tiger. You're a sculptor and you sculpt yourself a vase. And what do you think makes the vase? What makes the vase is not the tile, and it's not the
the substance of the material. It's the inner space within there that is surrounding it. Without that inner space within, there can be no vase. And without that inner space within you, there's no you. You're not skin and bone and all that. You are. That encapsulates an inner silence, an inner place that is totally and completely yours, uniquely yours. Your consciousness expands in every direction. When you do, you start practicing things like kindness, where judgment was before. I've often said that when you have a choice to be right or to be kind, just pick kind. Why? Because it's more closely aligned with your spirit. You begin to exude something called love. You feel it for everyone. Believe it or not, at the end of Immaculate's book, she goes to the prison where the people who were her killers, one was her mathematics teacher. And what happened is that you begin to embrace a kind of love even for the people who would do such harm to you. And I'm telling you, that's what saved her. You'll see that when you read it. That's what saved her. The ability to go to that place within, that place of forgiveness. As Mark Twain said, forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. Powerful thinking. You become an instrument of truth. You become someone who listens. You become someone who is God realized.
It's easier to get rid of guilt when you get a grander view, when you get a bigger picture, when you become more enlightened or more spiritually conscious or more aware of your magnificent potential. See, guilt is like it all takes place in the present moment, as does everything. It is a way of using up the present moment to be consumed with something that has already happened over which you have no control, because obviously you can't control what has already happened. And to me, the reason that people use guilt is not because they're guilty or they're even feeling guilty. It's because they want to use up their present moments in this way rather than in another way. And another way would be to take action, to correct it, to learn from it, to move on and vow not to behave that way in the future, and so on. But the guilty person doesn't do that. The guilty person cannot learn from their mistakes. Learning from your mistakes is simply learning from your mistakes. Guilt is saying that I'm going to use up my present moment to be immobilized or be depressed or be full of despair over what has happened. But when you get a grander, more spiritual view of life, you realize that everything that you did or everything that happened for a reason, that there are no accidents, and that all of those things that you did at one particular time toward somebody else that you feel guilty for now had a lesson in them. And so you look for the lesson. And in the process of doing that, you grow and learn not to do that anymore. I mean, that's what being human is about. When you have 7 children and 5 of them are under the age of 8, and you're around them a lot, you will raise your voice, you will say things occasionally that you don't mean. You might say something to one of your children who are very sensitive when they've done something that you think of as very stupid, and you'll say something to them like maybe you'll call them stupid, or you'll lash out in anger or whatever. These kinds of things just go on, and anybody who's parents of a large family know exactly what I'm talking about. And yet you don't want to behave that way. You don't want to be lashing out at your kids. You don't want to be striking them, certainly. You don't want to be saying things to them that you don't mean, and so on. There are options, for me at least, there are options always. And I do that occasionally, much less occasionally than I did years ago, but it happens. And I'll lose it for a second, and in a moment of frustration say something that I don't mean. Now, I have a couple of choices when this happens. One of them is to feel really guilty, and feel awful and fill myself with despair and flagellate myself, all right, in many different ways. And that will do nothing except keep me immobilized in the present moment and so on. And the other thing that I do instead of the guilt is I say to myself, this is just an indication of where you are not. You would like to think of yourself as like this spiritually aware person who is above this sort of thing, that is getting frustrated over the behavior of a 3-year-old. And you like to think of yourself as someone who but every once in a while you slip. It's like there's a learning thing in this for you. What it is that you're not there yet all the way. You're there maybe 90% of the way, but you're still not there. And it's a reminder of where I am. So guilt is no longer possible. It's like, this is almost an instantaneous learning device. And now what do I do with it? What I do with it, as soon as I have this awareness, because when you have the awareness, and you know that you behave this way for some reason, and the reason is so that you can become even more enlightened and more aware of yourself and your limitations, is I can go and put my arms around the child that I just said something really nasty to, and say, oh, I know that accidents happen, and Daddy didn't mean to yell, and I love you, and I can use the very experience that would have created a sense of guilt, and why did I say this to one of my children, and to bring me closer to that child, and perhaps that was the reason that I did it, whatever. That option is available to every single one of us all day long in every single thing that we do. The option of, one, choosing to remain immobilized in the present moment, to use up the present moment feeling guilty so that I can't do anything about it. If I'm feeling guilty, what else can I do? Or two, to say, this is an indication of where I am or where I am not. All right? And three, what can I now do to make sure that I use this in a positive way? And what happens for me is that as I use that way of relating to what could potentially be a guilt-ridden situation, is I find myself less and less getting consumed with, I'm more in charge of myself in the moments when I would have been frustrated earlier, so that those moments are less and less and less and less occurring in my life. How do you feel about your parents? How do you feel about the way you treated them, or the way that they treated you, or are you guilty about something that you said toward them, and so on? And after a while you get to a point you realize that your parents did exactly what they knew how to do, given the conditions of your life, and so did you. So that all the things that you said or all the things that you did were just part of what you were here for and what you had to learn. And you grasp that instantly. You don't get filled with guilt.
By turning the purpose of your life into one of service and leaving behind your self-absorption, you discover the irony of manifesting. The more you choose to be of service, the more profoundly you experience unconditional love, and the more you find materializing into your life. Service is best thought of as a continuous focus in your life rather than being limited to certain kinds of giving activities. Service is a state of mind that expresses love rather than fear, trust rather than distrust. It focuses on meeting all others as equals with whom we share a spiritual identity. This inner attitude of love reveals itself in action. Service does not require that you become a Mother Teresa. You serve by suspending your ego and extending the love that fills that space. It can take a million different forms, but when practiced with authenticity, from the heart, it makes all that is manifested into your life worthwhile. The only problem you will encounter is attempting to give or serve without love. Service without love is obligation, and it carries guilt and anger and resentment along with it. Work at being in a state of unconditional love with your service efforts, and when love is not authentically present, acknowledge that as well.
You get back from the universe, from the world, what it is that you put out there in the world. If your message to the universe is gimme, 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 which is a lot of people's message to the universe. I want this from you, I want that from you, please give me this, I have to have that. That's what their prayer is like, that's what their message is, and they say, I want this from the universe, gimme, gimme, gimme. The universe's response back to that kind of a mentality is exactly the same. The universe will say right back to you over and over again, gimme, gimme, gimme. And the interesting thing about all of this, the irony of this, is that if you shift that, and you say to the universe, to the world, how may I serve? How may I serve? The universe's response back to you is, how may I serve you? How may I serve you? And it's very intriguing. When you take your energy and your attention off of what you are demanding from the world, and instead saying, what can I give to the world? It comes from your saying to the universe and to the world, what can I do for you? How may I serve you? Life supports life in the same way that you put it out there. So the irony of all of this
is that when you shift into a how may I serve you mentality, you get all of the things that you used to demand from the universe but never seemed to arrive in a sufficient amount because it was always demanding so much more of you. But the moment that you start serving because it will then serve you, you're doing the gimme, gimme, gimme thing. Does that make sense? So you have to shift and not be attached to what it is that you get.
And it's really the basis behind that very famous line of the President John Kennedy's inaugural address. Ask not what your country can do, ask what you can do for your country. And the irony of that is, and I've learned that in my own life, that when I stopped thinking about what was in it for Wayne Dyer and how much could I get, and I began to shift and say, how can I help you? How can I give to you? What can I do for you? And people who write to me, I send them something. When I encounter somebody that needs help of some kind, I'm very often just giving that to them. And then I find that it just keeps coming back into my life. And once I shifted that energy off of what can I have into what can I give, it seemed to me that the universe responded back with the very same message. What can I give to you? And the most incredible and wonderful and beautiful abundance has flowed into my life in every way that I can possibly think of. You can't give away what you don't have. So take a look at an inventory of what you do have. How much do you love yourself? How much kindness do you have in you? How much peace do you have in you? How much joy do you have in you? And if you're able to give that away as many times as you can in a given day, watch and see how much more of that continues to show up and come back in your life. And if you're putting out there into the world that I am not worthy of attracting something beautiful into my life, that the universe will respond back to you with exactly that message. And there are people who come to me and who came to me for years when I had my own counseling practice and so on, and they would say to me, I just keep attracting the same kind of people, the same kind of events, the same kind of losers into my life. Why is that? Why do I keep doing that? And I keep attracting an absence of abundance. I just can't seem to attract abundance into my life. I'm always behind the 8 ball. I'm never getting ahead. And I suggested to them, I said, did it ever occur to you that that's the very kind of message you're sending out to the world and out to the universe?